that do have a stronger capital base like the United States. I would also add in that in a world that deglobalizes, the idea of having a supply chain with 1,000 steps is kind of silly and honestly really dangerous.
Yeah.
So you need shorter supply chains closer to the end consumer.
I think COVID made us all realize that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree, but
Yeah.
compared to what COVID has done, what's coming is a whole nother level in terms of intensity.
Tell us about that. Well, when you're finished, but
sure. So manufacturing, especially for things like electronics, it does best, it's most efficient when it can tap different wage levels and skill levels. So you do the low skilled stuff in one place and the high skilled stuff in one place. And for the last 25 years, that has made China very successful. They do the assembly, they do the low end, and they do it at scale. So they can then have the intermediate and the higher end parts elsewhere in East Asia or maybe even in North America. And there's a lot of back and forth, and the average manufactured product crosses a border at least 100 times. Even in automotive in the United States, if you're taking each individual piece, you're talking like 25,000, maybe 30,000 border crossings. It's massive.
Oh my gosh.
In the world we're moving to, that's going to be harder to do. But the United States has Mexico. So we've got 130 million Mexicans, 35 million northern Mexicans very proximate to the border, and we can still play in that old style manufacturing. At the same time, we have the best capital structure to bits and pieces move into the new style. And the consumer base is right here, both in the United States and Mexico. So having that everything proximate and co-located, that's going to be kind of the big mix of factors that generate outsized success. You're not going to have that in Asia, because the consumption base is gone and the labor structure is now too expensive. And if you break down maritime transport safety, those border crossings are more difficult because in the United States, it's the land border with a country we broadly trust. In East Asia, almost all of it is by sea, and the Chinese are making a point of being a bag of dicks at sea. So the very concept that you can have a maritime trading system in a country where China is either rising or falling is a bit of a reach. Oh yeah. For everyone who participated in globalization, it would have been like they and they alone had won World War II.
Yeah.
They had access to a world full of resources and markets in a way that only the Brits could have even dreamed of doing for the previous 300 years. And now it was available for everybody. So the only countries that for whatever reason didn't like that system were the countries that wanted all of the benefits and none of the cost. So countries that sided against the United States in the Cold War. Mm-hmm. And get a bunch of allies to side with us, even in the worst case scenario. That's why we did it. The fact that it made the whole world wealthy was a happy side effect from our point of view. From everyone else's point of view, that was the reason to join.
Not occurred, right?
Well, I mean, playing historical what ifs is kind of a fun thing. It's always guesswork, but World War II probably wouldn't have ended. It would have just continued on with the with the Allies then splitting apart with the Soviets on one side and the West on the other. And keep in mind that in the dying days of World War II, we dropped a couple A-bombs. So I think you have an idea of what that field of competition might have looked like. Sure. So since this is an investment show, I think the best way to do is to talk about a chapter that you haven't made it to yet. There's an industrial commodities chapter. So anything that goes into anything that's not energy and food. The Industrial Revolution did more than just introduce us to what we now consider to be electricity and manufacturing. It also took the lessons of the Renaissance and applied them at scale, first through the Germans and the Brits, and then eventually for the rest of the world. And we figured out all these components and elements that make up our world, and we figured out how to purify them and then recombine them in ways we found useful. What we have missed in the discussion of modern globalization and economic integration is their role. Because the very core of globalization is anyone can go anywhere to get anything. And when we talk about the breakdown of supply chains, we're thinking of semiconductors and tires and widgets, and that's true, but that's not the whole story. We're entering into a world where the raw commodity access that then goes into the process material, that then goes into the intermediate products, that goes into the finished products, that very base first step, that is no longer guaranteed. So we can look forward to large portions of the world losing access to the inputs that are necessary to attempt a modern lifestyle. Wow. And if you want to talk about the sexiest of all of them, silicon. Not for panels, silicon for semiconductors, because 95% of it comes from one mine in North Carolina.
Wow.
So it's one thing to control global food or global energy.
Yeah.
It's another thing when you can control the only input that allows digitization to even theoretically happen. And the United States is going to have to figure out what to do with that over the next decade.
Oh,
we're entering into a world where there's not enough energy and there's not enough food.
Right.
And where we're going to prioritize our own manufacturing. These are all strategic choices that we're going to make either by choice or failure to make one. When you get to semiconductors, though, when it's all coming from one place, that's an entirely other level. Because if you can't get enough energy, yes, your car stops. Yes, the lights go out. This is bad. But if you can't get any microchips, you can't even pretend to catch up in any sector at all.
Yeah.
Investing is not my world. I can tell you, though, that we are looking at chronic shortages in a lot of base materials that make up our world, not just the industrial commodities I just kind of went through, but food. The world's top wheat exporter has invaded the world's number 4 wheat exporter, and the world's top wheat exporter also is the world's largest exporter of fertilizer and the components necessary so people can make their own fertilizer. Yeah. So we're in the early ages of a multi-year shortage in all things agricultural. Russia's also a big player in the aluminum market, or it was, not anymore. Yeah. They also are big in copper. That hasn't gone to zero yet. It's on its way down. Platinum group materials, for example, especially palladium, which does double time with silicon and semiconductors. The problem as you're looking at all of these, however, is that sourcing is critical. One of the biggest disservices, in my opinion, that the financial sector has done for us all over the last 20 years is become used to this environment where capital is flush and liquid and we can invest in everything and we don't have to be all that discerning.
Right.
Because if the money is free, why the hell not? Well, the money's not free anymore. And so the financial sector has to actually provide value add. In the old system, the entire developing world was in one exchange traded fund. That's asinine to think that India and Brazil and China and Russia have anything in common aside from size. Their markets are completely different. The sectors they play in are completely different. Investing in them is completely different. And yet there they are all together. Same with frontier markets, which makes even less sense. Like what in the world do Argentina and Vietnam have in common? Yeah. Nothing. We have to disaggregate all that now. Okay. And that goes not just for the markets in general, but for the specific products. So, for example, if you want to invest in agricultural processing, that seems like a big business right now. It's probably going to get bigger. But all the major agricultural processes that operate in the economies that are not getting hit by these shortages, think France, Canada, Australia, the United States, they're also in Russia and Ukraine.